the business did not take off. So then we're like, what are we going to do now? We've got 4 kids to support. We have no income coming in. What are we going to do now? So then we tried finding jobs. Well, the house we were renting, they ended up selling that out from under us. All right, where are we going to go? We have no income coming in. We have 4 kids. Like, what are we going to do? Applying everywhere. Couldn't get a job anywhere. And I've had a lot of different jobs in my life and always with a good work history. I couldn't even get hired at Walmart. I'm like, I can't even get hired at Walmart. Like, what is wrong with me? Finally found an ad for a food truck job. Needed a manager. I'm a guy who never owned a food truck. And after working on this food truck for a while, I was like, why are we busting our ass working for somebody else when we could be doing our own? So then we built our own food truck. We learned through the school of hard knocks. You know, like there was a lot of competition and you had to learn things, and it was good to be kind of thrown into that, and it was sink or swim.
All right, welcome back to the Rain Brings Growth podcast. I got Rhi Hoisington here today. She's the owner of Mad Mac here in the Treasure Valley. She's a pretty cool person. Can't wait for you guys to meet her. How's it going, Rhi?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's a first time, so glad I could help you out. You got a podcast coming up you want to launch, so we'll be working together a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. So I get to learn the ropes firsthand now.
Yeah, it's a big learning curve for sure. Yeah. I will not lie and sugarcoat that one. It's a lot of learning, but we got YouTube, so.
Yeah, right? If you don't know how to fix something, go to YouTube. Don't know how to podcast, we go to YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. So we usually just start out from your beginning in your childhood and what got you to this point. But where'd you grow up at?
So I actually grew up in Washington. I was born and raised in Washington. And then we went from Washington to Colorado, and we're there a little under a year. Then we ended up in Idaho. And then I spent about a year and a half in Utah, and ended up back in Idaho. So basically, Idaho's more home to me, I think, now at this point than anywhere else. But yeah.
So you said you lived in Washington for how long, sorry?
About 30 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You grew up there and more. I thought maybe you just moved here when you were like a fresh adult.
No, by the time we moved to Idaho, we had 2 kids and a third on the way. So, yeah. So most of my life was in Washington. I'm old now, so it's kind of about 50-50 now. But, yeah, most of my life is in Washington, born and raised there, and I lived all over Washington. We moved a lot, so, yeah, I kind of know it like the back of my hand.
So what was your childhood like? Did you do sports or anything, or?
I didn't do sports, so I grew up in an abusive home, and so my mom was very much, she was abusive, but she was also, like, overprotective. So I wasn't really allowed to do sports until I got into, like, high school, which I tried to do sports, but then that became just nothing but a lot of drama. Like, she always made me late for sports, you know, so I missed practices. And then if I went to practices, she was also bipolar and narcissistic. And so if I went to practices, then she was accusing me of doing things that I wasn't supposed to be doing. And I'm like, I was here, you know, and she also wouldn't like pick me up. And we lived in a small town. So it was a 45-minute commute to school. So we had an activity bus that dropped us off in town, but she wouldn't come pick me up. So that became, you know, at 14, 15 years old, I had to figure out my own way home, which was not always easy. And so finally it just got to the point where I just quit doing sports altogether because it was more of that hassle than it was a reward.
Yeah. What were you playing?
So I played basketball for a little bit, and I'm small, so I mean that was challenging, but it was also not bad because, you know, people didn't ever expect me to get the ball. So I played basketball for a while, and then I played softball for a while on that, and that's where it became really challenging because a small town, you have to travel for long distances to go to other small schools. So sometimes our drive time was like 4 hours one way to go to a school and play a sport. And so that usually created a lot of conflict with my mom. And so it just got to the point where I gave up on it because it was more of a fight than it was worth as a teenager.
So what'd you do when you weren't playing sports in a small town?
Well, small town wise or home wise?
What'd you do? Yeah, just to pass the time then. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do in a small town that aren't traditional stuff in a big city. So
So when I still lived at home, we lived on property in the woods. So I would go explore the woods with my dog. I did that a lot and kind of went hiking and that kind of stuff. But then we also had dirt bikes, so I would ride dirt bikes up and down the trails and go explore that way. So I really wasn't allowed to do a lot when I lived at home because, like I said, it was just always became a battle with my mom. So when I left home when I was 17, Halloween of my senior year. We got into a big fight, and I finally just had enough. And she's like, if you don't like it here, get out. So I did. And after I left home, I kind of went a little wild because being a kid who was not allowed to do anything at all, I now had all of this newfound freedom. And so I kind of went a little wild and I partied a lot. It was also my senior year. And, small town kids, we find things to keep us entertained, not always appropriate or legal things, but we found the things to keep us entertained. So, yeah, I just kind of, and then I was working a lot too. And so I was working full-time and going to school full-time. And so that kind of took up a lot of my time until I graduated. So
what were you doing for work?
I worked at a very small mom and pop restaurant. So it was called Rucker's. It was a burger and pizza joint. And so I started working there when I was 15, and then just stayed working there until after graduation. And then I got a job at the lumber mill. That was like the big thing in a small town. Like if you made it to the lumber mill, you're making good money, and you're like highballing now. So, and so I did that for a couple of years until I eventually left the town because there just wasn't anything there for me.
So when you were 17, were you just couch surfing until you finished high school, or?
So I did when I first left that day. Being a small town, like my family at work, they were my family, And so I told my boss, like, what happened. I went in and I was just like in tears, and she's like, what happened? And she knew how my home life was. And I was like, I left. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I literally left with my backpack, which had all my books for school in it, and as many clothes as I could fit in that, and then a grocery sack with as many clothes as I could fit in that. And it was pouring down rain because it was Washington. It was always raining. And I walked 2 miles to work. And I told her what happened, and she's like, well, you can stay with me. And it was her sister-in-law worked there as well, and she was single and whatever. She's like, you can stay with me, sleep on my couch until you figure it out. And so it was a couple weeks later, I actually found a place to rent because it was a small town, so you didn't have the rules of having to be 18 or whatever. And so I moved out with a friend of mine, and the first house we lived in was this A-frame house, right? It was a summer cabin because there was like no insulation in it, right? And we're going into the winter, and the top of it was a metal roof, right? And you could see outside from when you were upstairs where the beds were located. I was like, so it was cold. And so the only heat in our house was a wood stove, but when you're going into winter, you can't go cut wood and it's going to be wet, and we didn't know what to do, right? And so, because we even went and looked and like, where can we get wood from? And like nobody had any. And so the only heat in our house was in our bathroom, and it had one of those space heaters, like built in. And so we would get up in the morning freezing cold, and we would go hibernate in our bathroom and get ready for school because we were both still in school. It was our senior year for both of us. So that was an experience, and I lived there for about, I don't know, a month and a half or whatever, and I was like, we cannot do this anymore. And so then I ended up moving in. She moved back with her parents, and then I found another roommate who was older and had a place, and then we shared that place until I graduated and got a different place eventually. When I started working at the mill, I could afford more, but back then when I was working this little mom and pop, I was making $4.25 an hour. So,
Yeah.
so you're trying to like survive on that. And I only had my own bills to pay, which I didn't have a car or anything. So, I figured it out. I paid my rent and my utilities and everything, but it was a struggle. We were living a top ramen lifestyle, like that's what you survived on.
Yeah, you got to do whatever you can, right?
Yeah.
So when you were working at the restaurant, was that something you had envisioned that later on in life you'd be having your own restaurant, or was that just kind of something that just happened to be just to be making money at that point?
Um, I did at that point because I was like, it was like a family environment and it was fun. I had fun, and we lived in a small town that was touristy. So in the summertime, you got, like the campers and all that kind of stuff, hikers and stuff. And then the wintertime, it was like the skiers and the hunters and all that kind of stuff. So I always thought that I was like, well, this is kind of fun. And like I envisioned doing a restaurant, something more than that, because I loved cooking. And so I was like, I always wanted to go to culinary school. So I thought I would be more like on the Gordon Ramsay level of things.
The Michelin stars.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I always thought I'd get there. So, but yeah, I'd always wanted to own a restaurant. It was just, being young, I didn't have any idea how I was going to make that happen. So
when you left, did you ever keep contact with your mom?
So my mom and I kind of had a really rough relationship. We didn't talk for a while after I left home. And then I tried to rebuild it for a while. And at one point, after I had graduated, her and my sister, I have a younger sister. And so they actually came and lived with me because she had finally left her husband. So she stayed with me for a while, but then that all blew up because she was just nothing but drama. And so she ended up moving in with the new boyfriend. And then my sister ended up going back to live with her dad because she was only 16 at the time. And then after that, I didn't talk to her for several years. And then I got married. And after I got married, we pretty much had a honeymoon baby. And she had heard about that from, being in a small town. Everybody knows everybody's business. So she had heard about that and she contacted me. And then I ended up going out to see her. It was our first anniversary and, introduced the baby. And then she just did her crazy stuff again. And I was like, at this point I had a family of my own. And I was like, I'm not going to expose my family to this because I know what my childhood was like. And I'm not going to put my kids there. So then I never talked to her again. And then my sister contacted me in 2020 to tell me that she had passed away. So it was an interesting experience because I always wondered what that would look like. And of course, over the years of being married and having kids and stuff, like there's things you want your mom there for, But my mom was not a healthy mom. And I felt like I missed out on those things. And especially like the birth of my kids, like that's something I always thought she would be there for. And she had always wanted grandbabies, for as long as I can remember. She talked about it all the time. And I felt like I had missed out. And I always wonder, I was like, if I get that call that my mom has passed away, how am I going to feel about that? And I finally came to terms with the fact of that she's not the kind of person I want to have in my life and around my kids. And I kind of mourned her loss a long time before she passed away. So when I got the call from my sister, and I hadn't talked to my sister in a long time either because she was very much like my mom. And I just told her, I'm really sorry for your loss. And it's like I just had that complete disconnect from her of like, I still loved her as my mother. Like there will always be that. But she was pretty much a stranger to me, and that's what it felt like. So when I got that call, there was not that emotion because I had mourned her a long time before that, So that was an interesting experience for me.
Yeah. Did your sister have kids?
She did. She had a son, and it's funny because I have an older brother, and the three of us actually had boys in the same year. So it started out, I had my son in January of that year, and then my brother had his son in September, and her son was born in October. But not talking to her, I had no idea that she had a child until she contacted me to tell me that our mother had passed away. And then for a while, we reconnected and rekindled that relationship and tried to make that work. And then there was too many tendencies that were like our mother that I'm like, no, thank you. I don't need this in my life.
Right. Yeah, I was just wondering because if, she had kids and they were around your mom, how they were, because, you separate yourself from all that energy of negativity and stuff. So just wondering if like the other kids would have picked up on that and, if you could make comparisons of, obviously you broke that generational curse and then.
Yeah, so my brother and I, neither one of us had anything to do with my mom for the same reasons, and same thing, he didn't want his kids around that. And then reconnecting with my sister and seeing how her son was so very disparate. She also, my sister was a lot like my mom. And so seeing how her son was raised in that environment, because my mom also lived with her for quite a while before she passed away. My sister was her caregiver because she also had MS. And so seeing the way that her son was raised and the issues, he was very codependent because she raised him to be that way. He had no social skills whatsoever. He was the same age as my son, and they came and spent Thanksgiving with me one year. I think that same year maybe. And he couldn't even count to 10. And he's the same age as my son. My son was trying to play hide and go seek with him. So I definitely saw that very toxic dynamic of that codependency and that control. My sister ended up being just like my mother, and that overbearing control. Like, she never even put him in school. He had no social skills, There was so much that he missed out on, and so many things. Like, my brother ended up passing away, and so when we were at, we stayed in a hotel to go to his memorial and stuff, and her son could not even come and stay in the room with my kids and I because he was so afraid to be away from his mom for more than like 10 minutes. So, yeah, it was interesting to see that dynamic. Like, my brother and I broke away, and we both became entrepreneurs and were self-employed and had a successful family, and all this kind of stuff. And then seeing my sister, who lived in that toxic dynamic for so much longer, like, when people would look at us, they're like, you guys are actually related? Yeah, because we're so completely opposite, So it was interesting to see that dynamic too, because I had always wondered over the years, like, what did her life end up like? Because she was extremely intelligent in high school. Like, she was on debate and all that kind of stuff. And then she ended up going nowhere with her life, and it makes me sad for her, that she didn't break away from that or to choose her own life, So it's interesting to see like those dynamics and how they play out the further you get into adulthood.
Yeah, definitely. I think changing out your environment, just getting out of your comfort zone is going to have to make you grow. So
yeah,
it sounds like she stayed in the same place the whole time then and just just lived what she knew then, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting because, they say, like people who are raised in those toxic households, like, you repeat the cycle, right? And I can definitely see how that was easy to do, or you stay, even when you have trauma in your life, right? It's trauma, it's bad, but subconsciously you recreate that because that is what your brain knows, and that is what is comfortable, even if it's chaos. So your brain always goes back to what's comfortable. And I've definitely seen that in my life. There's been things I've recreated and gone to because that felt normal, but it's not normal. Once you break away and you heal from that, you're like, this isn't nowhere near normal,
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how some people just stay stuck in that cycle. And it all comes down to choices. And what do you want for your life? Do you want something different? Or do you want to stay here suffering and recreating this misery,
Yeah, you definitely have to detach from the situation. I've definitely seen that myself. Like, I could see myself starting to revert back to the area that I would not want my kids to be to. And you have to just be like, oh, okay, well, this is what you know, but this is not where you want to go. Yeah. So, because like we were talking earlier, your kids are going to just repeat whatever you do. So if you want to break that curse, it's got to break with you. Otherwise, whatever you're not willing to confront, you're just going to pass off to your kids, and it's not fair to them to have to confront those issues.
Yeah, 100%. And it's one of those things, like, I think after my brother and I both left home, he was older than I was. So when you leave home, and we had a conversation about this one time, and he's like, it's funny to look back at all the things that you thought were normal growing up, right? Because that's all you'd ever known. And then when you get out on your own and in the real world, and you look back and you're like, that was not normal at all. But you didn't know any different because that's what you're taught. That's what you're taught by your parents, And so seeing that in your own kids, and it's like, is this what I want to teach my kids?
What kind of things did you grow up thinking were normal?
Just like the chaos of our home, like there was always like a lot of yelling and screaming and fighting and all that kind of stuff. And, we were poor, we were raised in a trailer park and the whole 9 yards, and so it's like growing up in that environment, we just thought that's just how it was. And we thought, your parents yell at you and tell you you're a piece of crap and nobody's ever going to love you. Oh, that's normal, you know? And then you get out in the real world and you're seeing other kids with their parents and you're like, they don't yell at their kids all the time. Like, why do I get yelled at all the time? And things like that. And like my stepdad was also very abusive. And so he would wake us up at like 2:00 in the morning because he worked construction. So he would come home in the middle of the night and wake us up because the house wasn't clean. And it's on a school night. And we'd have to get up and clean the house, do the dishes or vacuum and whatever. And we couldn't go back to bed. And then we'd go back to bed with an hour to go before you had to get up and go to school. And it's things like that that were like, oh, yeah, that's just punishment for not doing what you're supposed to do. We thought that was normal. And then the other kids are like, no,
Right.
So you learn those kind of things that it's like, it's not normal. But when that's your only environment, that's you think that is normal.
Yeah, it's all you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could definitely feel that. I know I have to catch myself, like I said, with my kids, like, because I grew up in a house where everything was spotless. I was the only child. I wasn't really allowed to play with any toys or go play outside or anything like that. So I come home sometimes and I see the house is a mess. But I got 4 kids and they're actually having fun with their lives and playing. And I have to like detach from the situation and realize that I need to be grateful that they actually are being kids.
Yeah.
And that they can make a mess, right? Because there's families out there that their kids are bedridden or in handicap or, in chairs or whatever. So it's like once I have to like remember what I'm thinking is an issue, a lot of people would be grateful for and trade a bunch of things to have this life. So yeah, I think when you just grow up with that, though, that's what you think is supposed to be normal. And it's hard to detach from that situation and realize that your childhood isn't what you want your kids' childhood to be. So something's got to change or nothing's going to change.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to rewire your brain and really look at like how that affects your kids and like what their response is to it, right? Because when you're in those traumatic situations, you go into survival mode. So the way that you react or don't react, because there'll be consequences for reacting, to look at your kids and be like, do you want your kids to live in fear? Because I was very much raised in fear. So you were a good child in fear. You weren't a good child because you were taught to be a good child. You were a good child because you were afraid of what the consequences were, and so things like that. And just realizing, I was short-tempered with my kids for a long time. And I just thought that was normal. And I'm like, I don't like that look on my kid's face when I raise my voice and yell at my kid, especially when it's something so trivial, like you said, like toys on the floor or whatever, And so you have to rewire your brain and learn an entirely new way of thinking and how do you want your kids to be, And that's tough when you come from trauma because you don't realize, that was trauma. At least for a long time, I didn't realize that was trauma. But also one thing I had to learn too is apologizing. My mom, anytime we would ever get in a fight for anything, I would go to apologize to her as a kid and that empathy, and then she would not even acknowledge me. So I learned that 1, I'm not lovable from that experience, and 2, that it didn't do me any good to apologize. The result was still the same. And it's hard to go apologize to someone when you've done something wrong, right? Like that's your pride and ego. And you're like, I got to swallow that and go admit I did something wrong and that I hurt someone. And then learning from her, like she never apologized for anything. And I had to learn with my kids that, yes, I lost my temper and I yelled at them for something that probably didn't deserve that. I had to learn to apologize to my kids and own that. And when I learned to do that, that completely changed the dynamic of our relationship. Because then I showed them that I can take accountability for my mistakes, but also teaching them that they need to take accountability for their mistakes. So it's a hard process to go through and like rewire your brain from all that toxic stuff you're taught as a kid, right? Because as a kid, you just think that's normal.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been working on that with my kids too, is just trying to imagine that like my 80-year-old self wants to come back to this moment. Like, how would I treat them in that moment? You know, like, because you want to get upset and you want to yell at them, but you'll never get this moment back. And there's times that you do need to raise your voice with your kids, and they need to be punished and stuff. But then kind of got to look back and think, why am I punishing them? Is it because I'm trying to get even with them, like, or am I actually trying to teach them a lesson? Because there's times where I'm like, I'm just mad, and I don't want to make decisions when I'm mad because I'll hurt feelings or I'll say the wrong things, and then I have to go and apologize and everything, and like I should, but it's a hard thing to have to check yourself on.
Yeah.
But it's definitely needed.
It really is. And then I learned that, to have a discussion about that, because I grew up in a house where like you were to be seen and not heard, So to give my kids a voice and being like, okay, why did you do this? Or how do you feel about this? Especially when I've done something to hurt them, and then being able to talk about that and express that. And that completely changed the dynamic of not just a relationship with my kids, but every relationship I have in my life now. Of like swallowing your pride and hearing the things you don't want to hear, that you hurt someone, because nobody ever really wants to hurt someone, And so having that dynamic now and being able to talk that out and be like, and especially when I have to discipline my kids, like I have teenagers, sometimes the car keys get taken away or the cell phone or whatever. And then they're mad in the moment, and so we walk away and we let it cool down, and then we come back and have a discussion and be like, okay, I see where you're coming from, but this is where I'm coming from, and this is why this consequence is here, and then it just opens up the dialogue for your relationship too. So it makes it a lot stronger, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I think kids are a lot more savvy to understanding why. Like sometimes I'll have my kids, like, what would you do if you were the parent? Like, and then make them give me their own punishment. Then they understand. It's like, I don't want to do the punishments that I did as a kid. I remember my stepmom used to make me write thousands of sentences, which did nothing. It was just miserable work. Right. But like, I didn't learn anything from it. And the point of a punishment is to correct the action and learn from it so it doesn't happen again. So if I just give these mundane tasks just to pass time or whatever, it's not going to do anything. So
yeah,
I think just having those responsibility or those talks with your kids, like they're old enough to understand if you're punishing them.
Yeah.
It might not be, different steps along the way when they're 5 versus when they're 15, but it's parenting's a tough job though, especially when you're trying to break some chains of generational curses and trying to, change some stuff, because you're learning just as much as your kids are learning at the same point, especially your first kid.
Oh, 100%. The first one is the hardest, man. That's a learning curve. And then when you think you got it figured out, the second one comes along. And you're like, I ain't got nothing figured out. And then I also have 4. And so by the 4th one, you're like, I just give up. Whatever. We're just here. It's like it's completely different with each one. And I think, I don't know about you, but for me, I was not prepared for that, because I'm like, 4 kids, raising kids, like, it's just a thing you do, right? It's not always easy, but it's all the same, right? No, it is not the same. Not when you have 4 different personalities, because what works for one doesn't necessarily work for the other. And so then you've got to like figure that dynamic out, and like, I can ground this kid and tell them to go sit in their room, and they don't care. They're just going to go play in their room, but this other kid, if I send them to their room, they think their whole life is ended, So it's like, parenting, I don't know what to tell you, because I know my kids are older than yours, but I still don't have it figured out. And I have a granddaughter as well, and she gives me a run for my money, And so it's like, it's one of those dynamics you're always learning.
Yeah, my first 2 kids were 14 months apart too. So I didn't really have a
Yeah.
buffer.
No, you didn't. You're like one to the other. Oh, man.
And those two personalities are completely different. One's like a softie and one's a fighter.
See? Yeah. Yep. And I have that dynamic with my kids too. One is more sensitive to the emotional stuff and the words you say, and then the other one is like stubborn and bullheaded like me. And so it's like, so we butt heads sometimes, and don't listen to each other. And I've even had that with my son. Sometimes we in a heated discussion and we just have to walk away because neither one of us is listening to the other, And so it's interesting. Like they're all different, but especially when you have them so close together, like that's a lot of chaos going on there.
Yeah, it's a handful sometimes. So when you left what did you do after you left the logging mill?
So my brother lived in the city, in the Seattle area. So I ended up moving in with him until I got on my feet and found a place. And then I ended up going into the restaurant industry again and started working at Red Robin, which is where I ended up meeting my husband. So I did that for a while, and then I ended up going into the grocery business and worked there in management and stuff. And so I've done a lot of things in my life. I've had a lot of different jobs, but yeah, I stayed there for a while because I knew I wanted to do something. So I actually got laid off from the mill. And being a small town, like a lot of people, they never leave that small town, right? And they have kids and families, and like that is going to be their life forever. And so the first round of layoffs came, and it was voluntary layoffs. So I took the voluntary layoffs, and then they paid for schooling for a short while. It didn't completely cover my schooling, but I actually went to school and started to go for computer programming because that was something that kind of interested me. And then after being in that for a while, I realized I cannot sit at a desk for the rest of my life. I will poke my eyes out. I'm not a person that sits still very well. And so I ended up not finishing that. And then in that meantime, I had met my husband by then and ended up getting married and doing the kids and the family thing like right away. That was hoping to wait on that, but that didn't happen.
How old were you when you had your first kid?
22. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. Do you feel like you were too young?
Sometimes, like now that they're getting a little bit older, it's nice because when they're 18, I'll still be like 40. So that's my oldest one. But yeah.
That is a nice thing because like now that my kids, two of my kids are adults, third one's almost an adult. And so I still feel young now that I'm like, this is cool because now I can go live my life and do stuff. I don't have to like watch them. They're not young. Whereas like some people started later, but it's nice. But at the time you're young and learning. Like, I don't know about you, but I thought I knew everything at 22. Like I knew everything, and then you have kids and you're like, I don't know anything, but it's nice now that I'm older because I'm still young enough. Like I said, I have a 4-year-old granddaughter and I can keep up with her, Gigi. Her and Gigi, we go on adventures, and that's fun. But, when you're young, it's a lot.
Yeah, you're 22, and then you see your other 22-year-old friends, and they're out partying, and you're going to bed early because you got a kid.
Yeah.
And you're like,
yeah.
Even now, though, I don't like going out late, but especially back then, you're like 22 and 23, and those are like your party years, so to speak, and
yeah.
You're just growing up, raising a family, and if you're responsible, you're there with your kids, not just pawning them off. But yeah, that was definitely a rough piece. By the time I was 24, I had 2 kids, so and I wasn't even married. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was hard too. Yeah, because all your friends are going out and living their life and they're traveling and all this stuff, and I'm like, I got kids. We're just trying to make ends meet, being young and having a family. Because I don't know about you, but we definitely weren't financially stable. I mean, we weren't doing bad, but definitely, you're kind of living like paycheck to paycheck and stuff because you're buying diapers and formula and all that good stuff, and. So, yeah, there was a little bit of jealousy of watching my friends out living their life. Some of them started a family young like I did, and then others that were, like, just out living their best life. And I'm kind of like, I kind of wish I would have had that. But now they're older, and have kids and have to work around that more. Whereas mine are like teenagers and feral. So they can take care of themselves, you know?
Yeah.
And so now I get to go out and live my life a little more. So I can see the benefits, you know, the upside and the downside to both ends of that spectrum. So and I don't know. I think in the long run, I don't regret having them young. You kind of grow up with them in a lot of ways, especially that first one. But yeah, I don't think I would change it. I like having them be adults and me still be young enough to like keep up with them, and especially like my grandkids and stuff, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely don't regret having kids young. It made me grow up, and I still had a lot of growing up to do, but it kind of scares me to think if I wouldn't have had kids where I would have ended up, because I was nothing pushing me to grow up.
Yeah.
I was just doing my own thing and partying a lot. And then 21, on my 21st birthday, we actually had to go to the doctors for my wife because she was bleeding, and they told her that she had a miscarriage on my 21st birthday. So like a night we should be out partying, which we still did go out, but my wife's like, I don't think I really had a miscarriage. So she didn't drink at all. And then like 2 days later, we went back to the OB to scan her and stuff. And they're like, nope, there's a heartbeat. So, so it was crazy, but that was, you know, we just did a lot of staying at home then and raising a family, and still had party days and stuff. But there's a lot of growing up that we had to do. And unfortunately, the first kid and the second kid really had to grow up with us. We're trying to learn how to be an adult.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a learning curve for sure. I always tell my kids now, I was like, I'm probably at that point in my life where I need adult supervision, you know, because I'm just out living my best life. And they're like, you're supposed to be the adult mom. I was like, I don't want it anymore. Like, this is your turn. You can be the adult, you know, which, I mean, I do parent them and stuff, you know, but it's interesting now because now as an adult and like having adult money and my kids, you know, can do their own thing, like, it's fun for me to go out and I don't have to worry about my kids at home, you know, because of course now we have cell phones and all that kind of stuff, so I can always contact them. But, you know, just being able to have some of that freedom for me to go out and do stuff. And, you know, especially like my 25-year-old, you know, and stuff. It's like we kind of get to learn together, you know, and he's a single parent and the mother's not in the picture. And so he's doing this all by himself. So now I'm kind of co-parenting with him, and sometimes I will watch her so he can just go out and still be an adult and have his own life, you know. And I'm like, yeah, you need to go experience that stuff, you know, and not just feel tied down, like feel like you're trapped, you know what I mean? So it's definitely interesting when you're younger and a parent because you're still learning stuff, and there's still, I think, kind of that wild side of you that wants to go out and live your life and do what all your friends are doing. But also there is a lot of pluses to having the kids younger, and it does kind of keep you a little more stable, because I think if I hadn't had kids young, I might have kind of gone a little on the wild side too. Kind of like when I left home, you know, I kind of went a little wild because all of a sudden I had all this freedom and nobody to tell me no anymore. So I'm like, I'm going to do this just because I can do this, you know. So yeah, it's an interesting experience.
Had to have something ground you back down to earth.
Yeah, I did. And, you know, from a young age, like I wanted a family and everything. I wanted the family I never had. So I think that's also why I got married young. You know, I found someone that I thought would give me that, you know, and so I was kind of all in for that. And I never regretted it when I was younger, you know. But yeah, had I not gotten married and had kids at a young age, like I don't know where I would have been. I probably would have been like I'm a free spirit, so I probably would have like traveled the world in a van, you know, which sounds like a good adventure too. I can still do it, you know, but yeah, I don't know where my life would have been had I not like settled down and had family.
Yeah, everything happens for a reason. You can't understand it in the moment when you're doing it, but you look back and understand that happened for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because like I said, I didn't plan on having kids so young. It was a whoops, and that was that, you know.
Right.
So yeah, I think most people probably don't plan on having kids. You know, I think most kids are whoops.
Yeah.
Didn't plan on that one, but
you figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, you figure it out, and knowing now what I know now, I sometimes wonder how that would have changed how I was as a parent, but I also don't know that I would know what I know now had I not been a parent so young. You know what I mean? So, like you said, all things happen for a reason.
Yeah, I was talking to someone the other day about like the scary spots of when you want to leave your job, a secure job. And they're like, well, it's like when you have your first kid, it's really scary, but you figure it out somehow.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to do it. You don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's crazy because you think about the time you have your first kid and you don't know, you're thinking you have to get up. You're not really thinking about all the times you got to get up throughout the night and
Yeah.
all the sacrifices you're going to make and
Yeah.
things you're going to have to say no to and parties you're going to leave early because the kids aren't wanting to do it or all the things. So
Or you
you just got to
cancel
figure
your
it out.
plans. Yeah. You have to cancel stuff because kids are sick, or, it's like, well, I really wanted to go to that concert tonight, but my kid's throwing
Right.
up. So, yeah.
And now that I'm older, I like having the excuse of having kids. It's like, I can't go out tonight. I got kids.
Right? I know that is a nice excuse too, especially like, with the custody schedule. I'm like, oh, sorry, I can't. I got my kid this week. So thanks for the invite. But yeah, it's good though.
So when did you open up your first business?
So I opened up my first business in 2007. Yeah. So my ex had been fired from his job in Colorado. We lived there for a short time. And so we had no jobs. And at the time, I was a stay-at-home mom. I did that for about the 8 months that we lived in Colorado. So I had worked my entire life. That was a weird experience for me to be a stay-at-home mom because I kind of went stir crazy. I didn't know what to do with myself. And he ended up getting fired. And so we ended up here in Idaho. And I bought a dog grooming and boarding business. Or actually, it was just grooming at the time. And my ex-father-in-law, he's like, hey, I found this business. I know you've kind of always wanted to work with dogs. This isn't along the lines you wanted to work with dogs, but here it is, and I'm like, okay. And I thought about it, and he loaned us some money to buy this business. And I had never owned a groomable dog in my life. I always had like labs and, stuff like that. And I had never groomed a dog, never owned it. Like a bath was all I'd ever given to a dog. And now I'm going to cut hair on a dog. I don't know what I'm doing. And I was like 6 months pregnant with our third child. And so learning this business, and we paid the gal that we bought it from for 2 months to stay on and train us. And so we did that, and this was like a whole other ballgame, right? And I was like, what have I gotten myself into here? But I actually liked it. And then I realized that I had this way of working with dogs, because we would get clients that come in and be like, oh, well, the last groomer I went to, they're like, oh, you need to drug your dog because your dog is terrible and all this kind of stuff. And I would be like, okay, well, let's see what we get. And then they would come pick up their dog, and I was like, your dog was fine. They're like, what? The last groomer said he tried to bite you. And I was like, no, your dog didn't try to bite me, It was actually pretty good, They're like, seriously? And so they would come back, and then that's when I started learning that I had this ability to work with these dogs and to really work on the dog's level. And this is when I started learning about energy and how energy affects everything. And at the time, Cesar Millan was like a really big thing. I don't know if you know who he is, the dog whisperer.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I would watch him a lot and how he interacted with these dogs and stuff. And I was like, well, that kind of makes sense because now I have real life experiences that I can put this into work and figure out how the dogs and stuff. And getting these dogs that people would say, oh, they were horrible, or, oh, you have to muzzle them and stuff, and understanding, like, what I'm bringing to the table affects this dog. So if I am irritated with this dog's going to fight back against me. But if I can keep calm with this dog and be firm, and this is what I want you to do, the dog would start just doing what I needed it to do. And then I would get a lot of people that would come in. The word of mouth was going around because the Treasure Valley was still pretty small at the time. And they'd be like, oh, I have this really difficult dog. This other groomer makes me drug them, or they have to muzzle or whatever. Would you try? I was like, yeah, I'll try. And so I ended up getting these really awful dogs to come to me. But it wasn't bad because I had good experiences for the most part with them. We did have a couple that I'm pretty sure the devil was in them, but those were few and far between. And so then I expanded to go from grooming. I'm like, how can I expand this? And then we expanded to do boarding. And then when I started doing boarding, I started working with like rescue dogs and working on training. Because I'm like, if I have this ability to take this dog who's awful and is Cujo, and I'm not having this experience with him, then I wonder what it's like working, with other dogs on a training level. And so I started doing behavioral training. I didn't want to do the sit-stay stuff because I just find that boring. And dogs need it, they need that stability and that training and stuff. But I wanted to more fix the problem is what I wanted. So I started working with rescue dogs and taking these dogs that they were said, couldn't be adopted or, needed to be put down. And then I would take these dogs and rehabilitate them and adopt them out. And then I started expanding to having now clients come for training. And the same thing, my dog was attacked by this dog. And so now they want to attack every dog. And so I had to teach people how to think like a dog. And for me, that translated in my own life because I'm like, it's about energy and what you're bringing to the table. And if you are already anxious and you're taking your dog who is anxious about being attacked by a dog and you're anxious too, your dog's feeding off of that. So you're just compounding the problem here. And so then being able to teach people that and to be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then when they implement it into their life, and then they're like, my dog is like 100 times better now. And I can take my dog for a walk at the park and we don't have the issues, and stuff. And so it was just, I loved that business. It taught me a lot and the dogs taught me a lot. And I ended up rescuing this one pit bull that he came from a severe abuse case. And when I got him, another trainer had worked with him and they're like, he needs to be put down. He's awful, yada, yada. And so I had him the first day and I was like, he's got some issues, but I don't think it's worth putting him down. And so the lady that ran the rescue, she was like, well, why don't you work with him and see what you get? And I was like, okay. And this dog, he was very food aggressive because he had been starved. When they rescued this dog, he was emaciated. You could count every bone in his body. And he looked like a bobblehead because he had that big pit bull head and his very scrawny body. And so I worked with him on food aggression and stuff, and getting him to slow down and understand that food is still going to be there. It's not something you have to hoard, when it's right in front of you. And I ended up rehabilitating this dog, and this dog became my number one pack member. And I would use him to assess other dogs because I learned how to read energies of dogs and their behaviors by using dogs in my pack. And at one point I had 9 dogs in my pack because each dog had a different personality and a different energy type. And so I would use those to sometimes train dogs how to be a dog, So that I really liked that business, and I did that for about 7 years. And it was a good business. I learned a lot and grew a lot throughout that process.
How has learning about all the energies helped you out in being a leader in businesses?
That was a huge thing for me because I'm more of a dominant personality. I don't know dominant. I'm a to the point kind of person, and I get in and I get things done. That's my personality type. So I had to learn how people were perceiving that. And the dogs are what taught me that. The dogs taught me about energy. And I think the biggest thing for me is when I started going through my divorce and all of a sudden my pack, I was having fights in my pack. I'm like, we don't have fights in the pack. What is going on here? That made me look at me because my energy was off. I was in a dark place. And I didn't realize that was affecting the dogs, which then also, it was permeating to everything in my life. So having the pack, they taught me a lot about how my energy affects everything else and about how showing up for, employees and everyone in my life, my kids and everything, the energy I'm bringing to that completely changes the dynamic of the situation and how that's going to play out, And so I had to learn to like soften myself in a lot of ways because of what was the perception of me, and what energy was I bringing. When I'm coming in with that energy of like, I'm just going to get stuff done, somebody else who's kind of like a little more shy about it, they're like, oh my gosh, she hates me, or she's so mean, or, like I'm going to get in trouble, So it definitely made me look at the world in a completely different way, and realizing like, because then I started observing that with people that I was around, and like watching other people and how they interacted and the energy that they were bringing. So it really, as funny as that is, it gave me a different perspective on people and energy and everything, and how that affects everything in your life just by watching the dogs.
Are you pretty good at picking up on people's energies? Like if you're going to hire someone, can you get a good idea off the bat of whether they'd be a good fit for your working with you? Or
I am now. Yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't until I had those experiences and like working with the dog so much that I understood that. But now I'm pretty good at reading people's energy, and I'm like, this is not going to be a good fit. And especially, for me and stuff, like sometimes I get a lot of teenagers that work for me. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know how this one's going to work out, because I can read that their energy is very like shy and introverted and stuff. And I'm a very outspoken person. But then sometimes I'll still hire them because I'm like, I'm just going to see where we're going to get. Like, let's go with that. And sometimes they still surprise me, because they're like, at first, they're like, I almost was afraid to take the job because I was afraid you didn't like me. And I was like, really, is that how you perceive that? And they're like, yeah, because you're a very direct person, and that's not something I've experienced. And so I thought you didn't like me is why you were that way. I was like, no, I'm that way with everyone. And they're like, yeah, I see that now, but at the time I didn't, And so it's definitely, I can usually read people pretty good, and you can read like when somebody's going to show up and do the work, and then you can see when people are that like energy and they're just going to get in there and get it done. And then you can see the ones who are much softer. And I'm like, for as busy as I get in the things that we do, like when you're in the heat of the moment in that kitchen situation and your line is 30 deep, you're just get it done, and so you're very direct and like, let's do this. Some people are more sensitive on that, and I'm like, you aren't gonna last a day.
yeah, the fight or flight kind of thing.
Yeah, it is. And because everybody gets stressed, when you're seeing 30 people long and you're like, I got to get through this line, because you're thinking, if I was in that line, would I be irritated right now? And so then you're also wondering, and sometimes people are, and so they get up to the register. You need to be able to handle that under pressure and not take that personal, and like, okay, like, I'm sorry, we're going as fast as we can or whatever, so, and things happen, you have to be able to kind of roll with it. So when I hire people, I'm like, look, this gets really chaotic. Can you handle that pressure? And I've had some pretty amazing employees, sometimes I'm like, we'll give it a shot and see where it goes. And sometimes they surprise me, because I'm like, they'll just get in there and roll with it. So yeah, it's always an interesting experience.
Do you see a common trait between the ones that do make it? Like something in their life, like maybe they have kids, or maybe they've grown up in like a chaotic scene or something, that they can handle the chaos a little bit better?
I see it from both ends of the spectrum. Like sometimes I see people that have grown up in that chaos and they can't handle the chaos because it's too triggering for them. But then I also have some employees that have grown up in that chaos, so they just roll with it and they go because they're used to that. So yeah, I guess I tend to hire people that have more had trauma somewhere in their life, because they know how to like just deal with the chaos and not take it personal and just keep going with it, And so yeah, there's both ends of the spectrum there.
I wonder if kids that come from a multi-child family would do better, because they already have a chaotic house, usually having multiple kids in the house.
Yeah, and I've seen that too. And like kids who've been like an only kid, that tends to be harder for them because they don't have the competition, I guess, So they're just used to doing their own thing and not having to really interact with someone else, or like you think of things go a certain way, which you might be able to just do in your house and you don't have anyone challenging that. And now you come into a work environment where somebody's be like, well, I want to do it this way. And they're like, but no, this is the way you do it. And they're like, no, but I want to do it this way. So you see those dynamics and stuff. And I definitely think it's, people who've been raised like chaos of like extra kids and stuff, like they tend to handle that a little better.
Yeah. Do you think you have a lot of kids that have entitlement issues nowadays? Like they don't like people telling them when they're wrong?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not even just kids these days. It's like people as a whole. Like it's so hard to find good employees anymore because nobody wants to work. They want to show up for work. They want you to pay them the top rate of pay, and they want to sit on their phone on social media all day. They don't want to do they don't actually want to work. But then I also get some people like I know their parents and they're like, will you hire my kid? And I'm like, sometimes this isn't always a good situation because this is who I am as a boss. Like I have an expectation and how they should show up. And they're like, that's why I want my kid to work with you because you're going to lay down the law and you have expectations and you hold to those. And whereas you don't always find that, like, especially in the corporate world, because people just don't want to work. And so they don't care about the standards, right? Whereas I own my own business, I'm like, there's a certain level of quality that I have in the way I run my business. And there's a certain way I expect things to be done within reason. I'm always going to listen to your ideas. And if you think it'll do better some other way, like, yeah, let's try it. And so I find that a lot of kids, when they actually come work for me, I find, sometimes they're a little timid at first, but then they get in, like this 16-year-old I have. The first day she worked for me over the summer. And the first day she worked for me, she was like really quiet, and this is her first job. And I was like, this kid is not going to last. I was shorthanded for an event, and her mom's like, my kid's available. I was like, okay, well, got to do what I got to do. You roll with it, And she was very quiet. And then I was like, I don't think this kid's going to show up next week. And I said, hey, I have a lunch shift next week that I need covered. Are you interested? She's like, yeah, I'll be there. So she was there. And that day was just total chaos for me because I had truck problems. So I was running late, and I hate to run late to an event. And then I had generator problems. So it was like just late getting open, and it was just chaos. And she's kind of standing there like she didn't know what to do. And there was nothing she could do at the moment because I had to fix the problem, And then I told her at the end of the shift, I was like, female, I'm going to tell you, I was like, if you can handle working in a food truck, you can handle anything that comes your way in life. And she's like, really? I was like, yeah, you did great today. You just went with it. I was like, and I'm impressed. And then, she was still kind of quiet. I was like, do you want to keep working for me? She's like, yeah, I'll keep working for you. And she went all through food truck season. And now that kid is the one that gives me a run for my money. Like, she gives me the hardest time out of all of them. And she's the one that I thought was going to be the quietest. So you just never really know. And she's one of my hardest workers. She gets in, and whatever I tell her to do, sometimes she rolls her eyes at me and she's like, I don't want to do that. I said, I know you don't, but you're going to, right? And she's like, fine, So, I mean, it's fun. It's fun working with them.
You got her to come out of her shell.
Yeah, and I don't think she was really in her shell, I think she was just trying, it was her first job. But then she even told me at one point, she goes, when my mom told me to go work for you, I didn't want to go work for you. I was like, thanks for sharing. And she's like, I don't even like mac and cheese. And I was like, she goes, my mom told me to go work for you, and I started crying. I was like, were you that scared of me? She's like, I didn't even know you. She goes, I was afraid, like a food truck, and I didn't like mac and cheese, and like my mom made me go do it. And she goes, but now I'm glad that I came and worked for you, and now she loves mac and cheese. She eats it all the time. And so I was like, it's funny because she'll just share that kind of stuff. She didn't care about hurting my feelings or anything. She was like, I didn't want to work for you, And I was like, but you keep coming back. And she was like, I know. What's wrong with me? I was like, I don't know. So, it's fun. Sometimes they give me a run for my money. And like I said, she's pretty savage sometimes. Like, she really lays a smackdown on me. And I'm like, where did you come from?
Right? Yeah, it's kind of like when you look at your kids and you're like, oh, you're talking back to me, but I know where you got that from. Yeah,
definitely. Even with my granddaughter, like, her and I will go rounds. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you are definitely mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see that coming down the generations. So.
Yeah. So how long did you own the grooming and boarding business?
I owned that for about 7 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so you got a lot of experience with Energies then. all the dogs and everything.
Yeah.
And then did you transition more towards the boarding side of it and doing the grooming, or was it just like 50-50?
It was 50-50. So I just had a small facility. It wasn't super huge or anything. I think we had like 20 kennels. So it was primarily the grooming aspect I still did, because I was fast at that. And then we had the kennel part, and then I did the dog training kind of on the side. I didn't push the dog training as much because that took a lot of time away from me. But yeah, I grew it from just being the grooming to now we did grooming, boarding, and training. And so yeah, it was definitely a family business because like my kids come to work and they would help us walk the dogs and that kind of stuff, and of course cleaning kennels and stuff. And so they made money and I thought that was cool, you know. But
Yeah, that's cool that they get to see that, they're around the entrepreneurship the whole life. So they get to see what hard work is and that you aren't just getting a paycheck every 2 weeks. Like you have to work for everything you get.
yeah,
So I think having your kids growing up around riskier childhood of like not having the safe job, like say I have of, every 2 weeks I get a paycheck, but now they understand like what work ethic is. And if you're not working, you're not getting a check. So
yeah,
you're not just going to be getting, the hourly every 2 weeks. You're safe. And if you want to sit on your butt, you can sit on your butt. Like you're grinding.
yeah.
So
Especially for my older kids now because they've grown up in the business and everything, and so they see a whole different side of it, when they see me working these long days, especially like in the summertime, right? They're now realizing the sacrifices I've had to make to get where we are and how sometimes that requires working some really long hours, So now they have kind of more of an appreciation for it, of understanding like how hard it was for me to work and to earn these things that you now have, you know? And so I think that gives them a whole new appreciation, especially being out in the workforce and like earning their own money and understanding like how much work they had to do to get that money. Now seeing how much work it takes for me to run my business because now my oldest son, he helps manage the restaurant part of things. So he gets to see all sides of it now versus just being that teenager growing up and kind of maybe even hating it sometimes. He's like, oh, now I see why you do it. So it's a good experience for them to learn. Whether or not they'll be self-employed, I don't know, because they see me sacrifice a lot. So they're probably like, no thanks.
yeah,
But
but they're gaining a lot of traits along the way. Even if they don't want to be an entrepreneur, they're still learning about hard work and work ethic and being honest, loyal, and what happens when you're not. Obviously, they've probably seen some employees maybe you've had that haven't worked out because they've stole, lied, or anything like that. So
yeah.
at least if they ever do start something, they know what to look for.
Yeah, they do. They've seen all of that, but then also I've made them go get jobs elsewhere too at some point, which has been eye-opening for them because then they're like, it's different when you work for mom and you think you can push stuff and it's hard to separate the parent-child relationship from the boss-employee relationship. So then having them go somewhere else and work and seeing how things are run, gave them a different perspective, but also more of an appreciation for it and like why I show up the way I am at work and learning to separate that work relationship that we have versus a home life. Like if I get on you for something at work that you're doing wrong, it's not because I'm mad at you as your mom. It's because this is the way I expect it to be done as your boss. So it's been a good thing. It'll be interesting to see like where they go in their lives, but from what they were taught to where they actually want to go in life.
How'd you get into the macaroni and cheese business?
Well, we ended up in Utah because with my business out here, the grooming and boarding business, my ex had an affair with our employee who was also my best friend. So for about a year after that, tried to make the marriage work, tried to make the business work. We had 4 kids, young kids, and it just got to the point where I couldn't do it anymore. And so we ended up selling the boarding part of the business to the vet who leased from us in the building. And so sold that off to her and then shut down the boarding part of it and tried to restart the boarding business down in Utah because I just felt this need to move to Utah. I don't know why Utah. I don't particularly like Utah. I mean, I like parts of Utah, but there's a lot about Utah I didn't want to live there, you know? And I just kept getting this feeling I need to move to Utah. So I tried. We moved down together, even though we were separated. So for the sake of the kids, we stayed together. Couldn't afford anything, so we lived in the same house, trying to make this work and to build up a business. And the business did not take off. So then we were like, what are we going to do now? We've got 4 kids to support. We have no income coming in. What are we going to do now? So then we tried finding jobs. Well, the house we were renting, they ended up selling that out from under us. So when we moved in, we knew it was up for sale, but they're like, it's the winter season. Nobody's going to buy it. You're probably good until like spring. Cool. That was not the case. We get a call, hey, the house sold. You need to be out by the end of the month. All right, where are we going to go? We have no income coming in. We have 4 kids. Like, what are we going to do? So we had a travel trailer, so we ended up living in this travel trailer. This 24-foot travel trailer was 4 kids and 3 dogs. And we ended up down in Provo because his sister lived in Spanish Fork. And I don't even know why Provo, of all places. I honestly don't know. But we ended up down there because we're like, maybe there's a better job scene or whatever. So we're applying everywhere. Couldn't get a job anywhere. And I've had a lot of different jobs in my life and always with a good work history. I couldn't even get hired at Walmart. I'm like, I can't even get hired at Walmart. Like, what is wrong with me? You know? And finally found an ad for a food truck job. Needed a manager from a guy who never owned a food truck. Nothing. He's like, I need a manager for my food truck. Well, this guy also lived in Texas. So he's out here occasionally for this food truck, right? So I told my ex-husband, I was like, hey, you should apply for this. Because we had discussed at one point about owning a food truck. But out here, the scene wasn't there. And so I was like, and we just couldn't do it with our current business and everything else and small kids and stuff. We couldn't do it. So he goes and applies for this job on this food truck. Got the job. And then there was a lot of things on the food truck that he's like, this is not going to work. Because he had managed restaurants previously before we even started our own business. And so he had this experience and stuff. And he's like, this stuff is not going to work for this food truck. And the guy's like, no, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. And he's like, oh, all right. So he did. And he started the food truck. Well, then eventually I started working with him too. And after working on this food truck for a while, I was like, why are we busting our ass working for somebody else when we could be doing our own? So then we built our own food truck. And in Utah, you have to have a commissary because whether you are self-contained on your truck and can do everything on your truck or not, it's just the rules with the health department. So our commissary was at this Hawaiian place, Sweets in Provo. And so we quit for him, started our own food truck. Well, he hired this manager, and we're like, don't hire that guy. He's going to run your business in the ground. And, of course, the owner is in Texas. He's like, well, I don't have any choice right now. I got to. You need to find a choice because this guy has no idea what he's doing, and he's going to run your business in the ground. He said, well, I'm just going to go with this. So it was like, okay, cool. So we ended up parking at the same commissary. So we were sitting here watching this truck that we built basically from scratch for him because he never worked on the truck. And we're watching the events and stuff, and it's like not going good. The feedback is not going good. He's not running the truck, and the truck is just sitting there. Finally, it was there for like 2 weeks. And so I called him up. It's like, hey, what's going on with the food truck? And he's like, well, this guy quit on me, yada, yada. I said, why don't you sell me the food truck? I know that food truck better than anybody. Why don't you sell it to me? And he's like, well, I don't know. I got to talk with my wife. And I knew he's just hemorrhaging money at this point, right? And so he's like, okay. So he calls me up the next day. He's like, okay, let's do this. And, of course, at this time, we didn't have 2 nickels to rub together because we just started our own food truck, and we're still living in a travel trailer with 4 kids. And you're literally taking the sales from the day you're working and using that to buy supplies to run the next day, you know, like
right,
there's no profit, you know? And so I told him, I was like, hey, will you carry the financing on it? We'll make payments to you to buy this food truck. He's like, yeah. So that's how I ended up with my first 2 food trucks.
Oh, wow.
So, and then after running there we were there for about a year, which is good because Utah is a huge food scene. So we learned through the school of hard knocks, like there was a lot of competition and you had to learn things, and it was good to be kind of thrown into that. And it was sink or swim, So we learned a lot along the way, a lot of the hard stuff, And then it just decided I don't like Utah. This isn't where I want to raise my kids. This isn't where I want to be. So then we're looking where's all these huge food truck scenes? There's Arizona is a huge food truck scene, Portland, We're where do we go? And I was and none of those were just speaking to me, I was what if we went back to Boise? I'm yeah, we could do that. So we moved back to Boise, and then kind of the rest was history. So we had 2 food trucks, 2 different concepts, right? And that first year we ran both, but that was hard because my ex-husband didn't know a lot of the prep and stuff. I did the recipes and everything else. So then I was basically prepping for 2 food trucks to run a service, and it was just killing me. I was being pulled in so many different directions. So after that first year of running both of them, we looked at the numbers, and I was this one did twice the numbers of this one. I think we need to shut this one down and make it a second Mad Mac.
What was your other one?
It was called Bowled Over, so I did rice and mashed potato bowls, which it did decent numbers in its first year. I was just being pulled in too many different directions.
Yeah.
That I couldn't run both of them, And so we shut that one down and rewrapped it, and then we had a second food truck, which, because we were getting so much business anyways, and the food truck scene was still pretty small at the time. And so we did that, and then by the third year, we were doing an event. We were doing Art in the Park, and we had the truck parked behind the trailer. So we had a trailer and the truck, and so the trailer could do a bigger volume. And so we had people on the truck or on the trailer, running the trailer the whole time. Most somebody was on the truck cooking the whole day. It was the longest weekend of my damn life. And it was a lot. And after that, I was we have outgrown both of these. We've got to do something. We've either got to have a commissary or we need a restaurant. And so then we opened a restaurant because it just made more sense. Because even if we broke even, it was still supplying the trucks, which is where we were making the money and doing the volume. So if we still had this commissary space of the restaurant, then there was extra money coming in from the restaurant. It was kind of a win-win situation. And then, so it was 3 years in, we opened a restaurant. So it was a crazy growth. We just shot out of the water as soon as we moved back. So it was a good experience, but it was hold on to the seat of your pants. Here we go,
What were some of the learning curves that you had to learn in the very beginning, getting so busy?
We had to learn to manage that, the time with having kids and work around that. And it's that work-life balance that is extremely hard because we were just working all the time trying to build up that business and stuff. And then we had to learn, with a food truck, a lot of people think because they watch the movie and stuff, they're it's so easy. You just pull up and sell, and it's easy. There's a lot of hustle to it. And so it was learning that hustle and how to find the places to park and where we're going to make the money. And, when you're first doing that, you want to take everything, right? Because you're I just need to make money. Just chasing the money. And then it was we got to build the relationships. We got to build relationships. And so trying to get into the bigger events, that was a learning curve. And then the first big event we did, I wanted to cry because I was not prepared for that. And I had to figure out how to do that kind of volume, and you have long ticket times. And of course people were getting mad because they had to wait forever. They had to wait forever for the order. And then, and it was just and that kind of hurts your pride and ego when you're getting that negative feedback on something that you are pouring your heart and soul into, So you had to learn to not take things personal and just be okay, listen to what they're saying and how do I fix this? And I remember after one of our big events and we just got slaughtered. And after we were done, I was okay, how can I make this run smoother? And so then I reworked my entire system and figured out how to be faster and more efficient at it. And then it became a game for me of like, if I can do 45 bowls in 30 minutes, I want to beat that number next time. So then it became my competition was me, and being like, it kind of became this game for me. It was like, how fast can I do? How fast can I do it? And so you have to learn to be able to take that feedback, whether it's positive or negative, and not take it personal, and look at how is this showing up for people. And if I want to grow my business, am I going to be like, well, this person's opinion is not important, which sometimes it's not, because everybody has their own opinion on how things should go. Or am I going to take this and how can I improve my business with this? And there was times, you get really frustrated of like, well, I'm doing the best I can here. Like, what do you want from me? And then there was times where you just take it and be like, okay, I see where they're coming from. And yeah, I could definitely improve this. So I think that was kind of the hardest thing right there, is being able to take that feedback and either work with it and figure out what works for you or what you just need to leave behind, because not everything's going to apply to you, and everybody's got their own perception and thoughts, feelings, and opinions. But what is going to work for your business and make your business better? So I think that was probably one of the biggest things that I learned, is just to swallow your pride and ego and just look at it objectively and be like, okay, I see how I can improve now.
So when you had to come up here and you were trying to find spots, did you just go to different locations, ask them if you could park there, or how does something like that work?
Yeah, so the first year in business, like we would park at Les Schwab's. We would go and contact them, and then you would try to go to bigger places like Cabela's, but they wouldn't let us park there because it was corporate, and so a lot of the corporations, we learned the corporations were really hard to work with because of liability issues. And so then I started parking on 5th and State downtown. And because there used to be a truck that parked there, and they quit running. They weren't running the truck anymore. They had focused on their restaurant. So then I started parking there. And at first it was like really slow, but then I was consistent with it. And then business kept picking up and picking up and picking up. And so it was kind of trial and error, and then trying to get into some of these bigger events out here. When you're a new truck and you haven't done that volume, they're a little leery to let you in, especially since the food truck scene was a lot smaller then. And so it was really hard to get into those, and some of them it was like who you know.
Oh, right. And were those like concerts or like the fair and things like that, or what were the bigger ones you were trying to do?
So the biggest one I was trying to get into was Tree Fort, right? Because that one is a big event, and it's hard to get into. And so I remember every year we would apply. Every year we'd reach out, hey, do you need a truck? And they're like, we're full, because they could only allow so many trucks with the amount of space they had downtown. And just getting to know the other trucks and stuff. And then they had a truck that closed down their truck and sold it and decided to go do a brick and mortar. And so we contacted them and say, hey, we would love to come in there. And so the only reason we got in is because that truck closed down. But then the organizers reached out to some of the other trucks and, hey, have you ever worked with them? How good are they? And they're like, yeah, they'll keep up. They did good. And so it was learning like who to contact, and, sometimes taking off that risk of doing a big event, like when you're doing like Art in the Park, it's like a 5-day event. And so can I handle that volume? Do I have the staffing? Can I, and so it was like learning and talking to like other trucks and be like, what am I getting myself into here? Like, am I going to die today?
So is there like a community between all the other food trucks? You guys all talk to each other and kind of help each other out?
There is now. When we first started the truck, there wasn't a lot of trucks running. There was probably, I'd say, maybe 8 trucks that went around and did events and stuff, and then there's like your carny vendors and stuff that do like the fairs and the carnivals and all that kind of stuff. And then there's like your stationary trucks that just stay in one spot and don't ever move, And so, we would partner with them, and like if we're going to do an event, hey, what was your experience on this event and stuff. And then now, because there's a lot of food trucks in the valley, yeah, we all talk. We're like family. Food truckers are like family. And we even have like, private Facebook pages and stuff that will message each other and be like, hey, what's your experience with this event? Or have you done this neighborhood and what were your sales like, and kind of, or like, I'm going to do this event, like how many should I prepare for? Or just bouncing ideas off of each other, and so it's good now, I mean, I definitely didn't have that advantage when I started my truck, but now we have that advantage where we just talk to each other and it's a pretty good thing. Or like somebody will contact me for an event and I'm like, I'm already booked, but then I'll throw it out to the other trucks. Hey, anybody available for this event? This is what they're expecting, So it's been good.
That's pretty cool that everybody's helping each other out. It's not like you're fighting for your own spot. I mean, in a sense you are, but still it's, everybody's got their own thing, because just because you're mac and cheese doesn't mean that, you can't go to another event where a rice bowl is or something, right?
Yeah, and I mean, there's still some trucks out here that don't play well with others, and you definitely know those ones. But I think for the most of us, we know that if we help each other out, we're helping ourselves as well, because it's you create that synergy with each other, but also it's like, I'm a person, I believe, share your blessings, and so if anybody contacts me and is like, hey, what's your experience with this? Like, I'll share it, and I'd be like, well, this is my experience, and obviously what I do is different from you, so it may not be the same, but just helping them and like building their business too, because it's sometimes, especially when you're a new truck, like you don't know where to go and you don't know how good something's going to be, and you take risks and you see what works for you and what doesn't. And so being able to kind of help those other trucks and be like, hey, I have this event, they need an extra truck, are you interested? That's been cool to see, and like watching each other grow, and or things happen, like somebody gets sick in your family and you can't do an event. So knowing you can reach out to someone else and be like, hey, can you cover this event? So then you're also not getting that bad reputation in the community of like, oh, they always cancel events or whatever, It's like, hey, I can't make this event tonight, but I do have this option. Will this work for you? So it's been a really good thing. And, just, and we do events together, like rodeos and concerts and that kind of stuff. So, at the end of the night, like, or even during shift, we trade food because you get tired of eating your own food all the time, so it's like you've always got some place to eat and, just, that kind of thing. And like my kids will come to work with me. And so, and a lot of other trucks, their kids sometimes come. And so then the kids get to hang out and do whatever. And, it's kind of a culture, I would say.
So how big has building relationships been with your success?
Huge. Yeah, because when COVID came, like COVID changed the dynamic of the world as a whole, but especially in the restaurant industry. And like for my restaurant, like I pretty much kind of had to shut it down because people weren't going out to eat, they weren't leaving their homes or anything. But what we started doing is neighborhoods would contact us, hey, we bring our truck out so people can come, and get food and take it back to their home, right? And that is one of the things that kept us in business, because there was things, I had people contacting me, hey, Rhi, bring your truck here. And I was like, Whereas before I was like, I don't think that's a good fit for me. But during COVID, I'm like, what I got to lose? Because I'm about to be out of business. So I would go do those things, and it just, it blew up for me. And I was like, okay, and it's things like that. Even still, I get people that'll contact me and they're like, hey, I need someone, will you come do this event? And I was like, yeah, sometimes it's just the relationship. I know I'm not going to make a lot of money on it, but it's keeping that relationship. And then that relationship builds from someone else at that event. It was like, hey, I need you to come do my event and do this. And so it's like, that's probably the number one thing I've learned with business, is that building those relationships is really what keeps you successful in business. Because sometimes something you might not have thought about, somebody else is like, have you ever thought about doing this? I'm like, no, actually I didn't, and then it works, So I think that's a huge thing.
What do you think's harder to run, the food trucks or like the brick and mortar locations?
Definitely the brick and mortar.
Yeah.
Because the food truck, you can go to different events and like, you're like, okay, I went to this neighborhood and I didn't do well there. Maybe I'll try it again, and you still don't do well. You're like, I'm not going to go that. So now that frees up my schedule. I can go somewhere else, right? I'm mobile. I can go anywhere.
Sure, yeah.
And I can go to where it's going to be more successful for me. Brick and mortar, you got to figure out how to get those people to come to you. And so that's a whole other ball game. And things like DoorDash and stuff, that helps. But then also those cost us a lot of money, which people don't understand, because they're like, why are your prices higher? Well, because they charge me a higher price and I've got to absorb that somewhere,
Right.
So it's definitely If I had it to do over again, I definitely wouldn't do a brick and mortar. I mean, I like the flexibility of the food truck more and the higher volume. I enjoy those events where I'm just getting my rear end handed to me. Like that's my wheelhouse, you know. That's what I like. Is just where you're just slammed constantly. You don't have time to think about anything. You're just go going. Whereas the restaurant can sometimes get mundane and be slow. You know, you always have your slow periods and stuff, and that for me is harder to do.
Yeah. What's some good tips you'd give someone if they're starting a food truck?
I would say definitely do your research and know your cuisine and what the demand is for it. You know, obviously, if it's something like burgers or pizza, you got more competition with it. So it's going to be harder for you to find your niche and get out there and build that business up. So it's one of those things that I'm like, it's trial and error. It's not going to happen overnight, and you got to be patient. And there's a lot of hustle to that. You've got to find out where you can park and what works for you. You know, there's some big events that I do that I kill it at. And the other food trucks are like, I did not do well there at all. So you got to find what works, what's going to work for you. And everybody's goals are different. Like some people just want to be stationary and do that. They don't want to drive around or whatever. And that's cool. And some people it's just a hobby. And some people are like, no, I'm going to make this my entire living. So I think you really got to know kind of like what your goal is for that and be humble and be willing to learn because everything you think might work might not necessarily work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that'd be a lot of learning curve, especially I don't know anything about the food, FDA, whatever, things like that, but just dealing with a whole bunch of different personalities in the public I think would be one of the hardest parts.
Yeah, that is hard. And you get every event organizer is different, and some have it together and know what they're doing, and some don't know at all, you know? And so that becomes challenging and stuff. And I've been doing this for 9 years and I'm still learning stuff. I still learn stuff. So every event is different. And like I said, you know, the first time you do a big event, you're not necessarily prepared for it, you know, but definitely starting out small, you know, and kind of getting feedback from people who aren't afraid to hurt your feelings, you know, because I get a lot of people that are like, oh, well, everybody says I'm a good cook and yada, yada, you know, and it's great. You might be a good cook, but how does that translate into you selling that? It's one thing if you have your family come over and they're like, yeah, you do the cooking and you do great. Are people going to buy that?
Just need to ask kids. They're the most honest there is.
They are 100% the most honest. Yeah. If you don't know anything, yeah, you try the kids and yeah, they'll give you feedback.
When you started in Utah, was it already a mac and cheese place or was that something that you developed into?
No, Mad Mac was already a mac and cheese place. So originally the truck was a different kind of mac and cheese truck before it was Mad Mac. And it just was not good. And so then when I bought the truck, I completely reworked all of the recipes on it. You know, and it was funny because my kids will tell you the story. We were still living in this trailer, right? And so where we stayed, you could only stay there for a certain amount of days, and then you had to move out for it was like 10 days or something. You could stay there for 3 months, and you had to leave for 10 days. Weird city rules, right? And so we would have to go and camp for like 10 days, right? Which the kids thought was great. So at this time, I'm trying to develop cheese recipes. And so they ate so much mac and cheese in that time because I would try, different kinds of cheeses and stuff. And they'd be like, that was horrible because they didn't like the sharper cheeses. They're like, this one's not good, Mom.
Yeah.
You know? And so for like a week straight, they ate nothing but mac and cheese, you know? And so, it's one of those things that you kind of got to play around with stuff and figure out how you want to make it your own. And even since then, I've changed my recipe a couple times before I finally nailed it out, you know, to where it was like, I was like, okay, I'm happy with this and I'm getting the good feedback. So it's definitely a learning curve.
Just a lot of trial and error.
A lot of trial and error. And especially with cheese sauce, like if you can't cook that fast, otherwise it gets gritty, right? So that takes a lot of time because I make it in this big old tilt skillet, which, you know, you got to do that slow. So that's a couple hours to make a batch of cheese sauce, you know? And so and learning, like this worked, this didn't work. And then listening to that feedback and be like, you know, sometimes I have people tell me it's too cheesy. I'm like, it's mac and cheese. Like, what, what does that mean? What do
Yeah.
you mean it's too cheesy? You know? So, yeah.
I think it's cool because you add a lot of different proteins in with it too, right? It's not just straight mac and cheese.
No, it is. It is a lot. So when I first started the business, we had 4 menu items as far as the mac and cheese goes. And now I think I'm up to 15, I think. And I'll rotate some out in the restaurant and stuff. So I'm always coming up with something new. And next week I'm going to come up, roll out a couple new items and stuff. And it's funny because the feedback I get from people, because they're like, what do you do? What do you sell? And I'm like, mac and cheese. And they're like, and? It's mac and cheese. And I'm like, that's all you do? Yeah, that's all I do. And it blows their mind because like, how can you make a business out of mac and cheese? And then I start telling them like the kinds of stuff I have on it. And they're like, I never would have thought about that.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's kind of funny to watch their faces. And then the funniest thing for me is like when I see people come to the truck and for the first time and you hand them this big bowl of mac and cheese and then you see like this 5-year-old kid come out in this 80-year-old man. And it's my favorite thing ever. When I parked down on 5th and State, I used to get this older couple that would come and he had his VA appointments every week. And they would stop, get him mac and cheese, and he would then walk away with his mac and cheese and she would drive down to the VA. And every time his face lit up like a 5-year-old. And this guy was probably in his 80s, 70s or 80s. He just got excited every time. And that was one of my favorite things to see. And it still is to this day, is to see people's face like that. Like, it's like they won the lottery, So, yeah, it's been fun because I'm always like, what can I come up with next,
Yeah. I think that's really cool. I know when I take my kids to the restaurant, I don't let them get mac and cheese because I'm like, I'm not paying for Kraft mac and cheese.
Yeah.
Or a grilled cheese. It's like, those are the 2 options. Don't ever ask me. Like, I'm not going to pay for those. But if it's loaded, like, and that's an actual whole meal, then that's cool, right?
Yeah.
That's cool because you're also picking something that, like you said, brings out the 5-year-old kid in everybody. And whether you're an adult or a kid, everybody loves mac and cheese. So it's not like it's just to one population.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I hit all of that, the whole age groups, and sometimes I'll get, like, adults that are like, I don't know about you, but I grew up poor, and so mac and cheese was something we ate all the time, but it was that boxed powdered stuff, right? And that's kind of where I got the idea for a lot of things, because I'm like, what did I eat growing up? And like for us, back in the day, like hamburger was cheap. It's not anymore. But hamburger was the cheapest protein.
Yeah.
So my mom would cook hamburger and put it in mac and cheese with like some corn, and that was our meal, right? And so that's where I kind of got the idea for some of them. I'm like, how can I take this and elevate it to the next level? Not like, the poor people meal, but something that people really enjoy as that meal. And so a lot of that is where I've got some of my ideas, is just kind of upgrading that. And it's one of those things that like you can do so much. But even when I started this business, I had no idea how many different directions I could take this, but that's kind of what I like about it, because I'm like, how creative can I get with this?
It sounds like you're always on a growth path, whether it's learning this or now you're talking about wanting to do a podcast, something that you don't even know anything about, and now you want to learn how to do that. So it's like, it sounds like it's just a personal thing that you just want to always be growing. So that's really cool.
I get bored easily. I really do. I don't know if that's an ADHD thing. My kids are like, because I never thought I had ADHD until I became an adult. And my kids are like, You sure about that, Mom? You might want to look into this. And I was like, yeah, well, I get bored easily. I have to always be pushing myself and challenging myself to do something different. Otherwise, I get bored at some point. So now I'm like, podcast, making mac and cheese to podcast. Like, how did we get here? We don't know, but why not? Let's try it.
Yeah. I've never been tested either, but I'm pretty sure I got ADHD. I look back at all the signs and I'm like, yeah, it checks out.
Yeah, right? You're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense now. Yeah.
They see these reels of people like, they'll take their trash out, and then on the way to the trash out, they'll be like, oh, I got to do this. They drop the trash, and then they go do something else that takes them. They're like, then they go to throw something away, like, oh, there's no trash bag. Oh, that's right, I was taking the trash out. And then they go back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've done that multiple times.
Yeah, I thought it was just because I was getting old that I did that. And then I was realizing that's probably ADHD, because I will do that all the time. Or like cleaning my house, I go to clean something and then I'm like, I got to go put this away. So you go to put it away and then you see something else. And so you start doing that. And then I feel like I've never gotten anything accomplished because I'm doing like 20 different things and nothing ever really gets finished, you know?
Yeah, it drives my wife crazy. There'll be like random Saturday mornings like, we're cleaning out the closets today. And I just start pulling everything out. She's like, what are you doing? I don't know. I feel like we should clean the closets.
Right. And then you get distracted and you're like, oh, I forgot I had this, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I do. I'm like, oh, I forgot I had this, you know? Start going through stuff and I'm like, oh, where'd this come from? And then you're like, what can I do with this? Do I want to get rid of it? No. And then you put it back in the closet or whatever. Yeah. And then you get sidetracked doing something else and you're come back to your closet and you're like, why is all this stuff on the floor? What am I going to do with it now? I don't know if you ever finish that task or not. But
yeah. It takes a while. And a lot of stern talks from my wife.
Oh, yeah. See, I don't have anybody to guide me. I'm just like left to my own devices. And so at this point, I'm just like, let's see what we get.
So what do you think was it that pushed you towards wanting to do a podcast then?
For me, it was like, there's been all these life experiences that I've gone through, right? And so for me, I'm like, how did I get here? You know? And a lot of stuff I'll share with like friends and like other people, and they're like, your life is so weird. I'm like, tell me about it, you know? And I was like, I don't know how I got here. Like, why is this my life? And sometimes I'm like, I feel like I'm in a Lifetime movie or whatever, you know? But I've also noticed, like, in talking and sharing experiences and even going through, like, my own healing journey and everything and going through a very nasty, ugly, bitter divorce and, you know, a traumatic childhood and all that kind of stuff and, like, healing and growing and learning things, I'm like, I have a story to tell. And part of my healing and growing was listening to other people and their stories and learning how they got through that or their experience. And I'm like, well, if they can do it, I can do it too, you know? And it didn't look the same as it did for them, but, you know, because you got to find your own path and what works for you. But it was like going through these experiences, I'm like, I've been through some really, really dark stuff, you know? And I'm like, I need to share this because talking to other people, I'm like watching these other people that have also been through some dark stuff, you know, and then just sharing my story with them and like, you know, that kind of helped me get through it. And so it was not something I ever intended to do because it sounds like a lot of work, but I'm like, everything has just kind of been pushing me in that direction that I feel like now at this point, I'm like, I have to do this. You know, this is something that I feel called to do. And for me, I think one of the fascinating things about life is that everybody has a story, right? And we have all different experiences, but how we dealt with those experiences, sometimes it's the same and sometimes it's vastly different. And for me, I like to know people and their stories, like getting to know you and your childhood and what you've been through and like how it shaped you to where you are now, you know? And I think that's a huge thing in connection of people. And I think one thing that helps with that connection is doing something like a podcast and people sharing their very real experiences in life, whether it's good experiences or bad experiences, you know? I think there's always a lot to learn. And I guess it comes back to me wanting to always learn something, you know? So I don't know if this is going to be so much about helping other people or helping me. I don't know. Maybe we'll all get something out of it. So,
yeah, I think everybody you meet, there's a little piece of God in everybody, and there's little nuggets that you can pull from them. Whether it's, you know, just some of the experiences that they've been through or things that they've learned, but if you can cut down that time between what, you know, their whole life to learn these lessons and now you can learn it from them, I think that's been a cool thing about podcasts is people can just really share everything and there's no time limit. It's just, you know, true, how you feel. And then obviously, like for me, it's been really cool just to hear other people and kind of inspiration. Like I wanted to start my own entrepreneur journey. So people are telling me like everything that they've been through and I'm learning through them. And it's really cool. I think that people don't really get opportunities to tell their stories. So that was also another reason why I wanted to do it was like, there's a lot of people that, you know, die without anybody knowing some of their coolest things. And at least now with social media and everything, they can share it to all of their people that may have not even known any of their story. So I think it's a cool idea. And what's your what was the name of your podcast going to be?
How did we get here?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I want it to be something that is like sharing some of those really hard, dark, and ugly experiences that we've been through, right? Because we've all gone through it. And without the darkness, you will never know the light, you know? So it's a necessary part of life, but also like some of the really just weird, funny stuff. Like, I've ended up in some weird situations. I'm like, I don't even know how I got here, but here we are. And it leads to some great stories, And so sometimes those stories are just like funny. I want people to be able to look back and kind of laugh at life. You know what I mean? Like obviously some stuff is hard and you have to go through it and it's challenging, but you're learning. And that's the point of life. I think that's something I really had to learn is like instead of living in that victim story of like why me? Why does this dark crap happen to me? Like why can't I live that life over there? They look like they're having a good time. I'm not having a good time over here, But realizing that just because my journey doesn't look like theirs doesn't mean theirs is any less hard than mine. It's tailored to who we are. So sharing those experiences, but also like just learning to laugh at some of the stupid stuff you had to go through in life, right?
Yeah.
At the time, it was hard and it was ugly and you didn't like it. And you're like, why me? But now you can look back and be like, that was actually kind of funny, that I had to go through that. And then this was the outcome of it, you just never know. So I really wanted to create a community also of like people just kind of connecting and sharing those experiences. And sometimes it's going to be funny. Like me, I'm single and dating. And dating these days, dear Lord, I don't know what has happened to society. It's a nightmare. And I got a lot of stories from that. And people are like, because I'll post it on my Facebook and people are like, where do you get this? I'm like, this is my real life, guys. I'm not making this up. This is my real life. And they're like, seriously? I was like, yes, this is what I get. I don't know. I don't know how I got here, and there's things like that, but also sharing like a space, a community where people feel safe to like, yeah, I'm not alone in this, Yes, I've had to go through this dark, ugly stuff too. I had a miscarriage in between my first two kids, that was very hard and traumatic for me. And then talking to other women and other families, couples who've gone through this because it's hard for both people in that situation. And so it's like having that sense of community and sharing that kind of stuff. And then talking to people who've gone through it since, and it's like in that moment, it's hard and it's ugly, But then I believe that all things happen for a reason. And sometimes you go through the dark and ugly so that you can help someone else go through the dark and ugly, and vice versa. And so that's really what I wanted to create with this podcast. It's just kind of a sense of community and having something that we can laugh at, but also feeling connected, because I think connection is lost these days. It's getting harder and harder to find in the world we live in. So that's my reason for wanting to start it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's been, just since I've started, there's been some people that have reached out and like, man, I really appreciate you, putting that out there, because I thought I was by myself, and a lot of guys don't really talk to a lot of people, so just having those reach out to me has been cool. It's like if you can help one person, then I went through all that for a reason, and that can make a difference. Instead of thinking why me, you just switch that tonality to why me. You're like, okay, well, I went through that for a reason, and now it's a different, like, and more empowering instead of the victim stance.
Yeah. Yeah. I think especially like with what you do, I think it's especially important for men because, like you said, a lot of men, I think they keep things to themselves, like we created this society that was like, men aren't supposed to talk about their feelings. They're not supposed to show emotions. They're not supposed to, all this kind of stuff. And so then they just kind of stay to themselves and they don't talk about the hard, ugly stuff that affects them too. And that's why the rate of suicide is astronomically high, because a lot of them don't have that outlet and stuff. So I think especially like with what you do, that's just hugely important in creating that sense of community and knowing, yeah, you're not alone in this. There's a lot of people that go through a lot of dark and ugly stuff, and your story may be different than their story, but there's a commonality here that you can connect and be like, okay, well, these are the things that helped work and get them through it. Some are going to work for you, some are not, but it's kind of like learning and learning from each other,
Yeah.
and the things that work. So I think that's hugely important in doing this kind of stuff is like, how can we all come together and share this kind of stuff? So,
yeah, I definitely want to be there for people to reach out, but I definitely still want people to understand that you need to have these hard times in your life. Like, yeah. So there's a difference between needing help to like just giving up. because the person that you need to be has to go through those hard times to get to that end destination. So I kind of don't want that translation to get lost along this whole thing of like these hard times that you think are traumatic, like they do suck, but they're going to shape you. And if you will just appreciate the lessons in it, even though it sucks, or the things that you can take away from it, you know? So I think a lot of, I don't know, like we were talking earlier, a lot of the kids nowadays are just kind of soft. So it's like you need to understand that you do need to be broke. You need to be kicked out of your house or whatever you need to do. Like it's not for you. You can flip the script to I needed this or whatever you needed. But I just don't want people to get lost in the things need to be easy because there's no growth in easy.
100%. And that's something I'm with you on that because it's the dark times. That's when you learn and grow the most.
Yeah.
Like when you plant a seed isn't like growing into this big, beautiful plant, right? It gets planted into the dark, wet, ugly, uncomfortable soil, right? Like there's no light there. And eventually the seed grows and sprouts and it works its way out and it becomes, a plant or something that creates food or whatever, we're all seeds being planted. And sometimes you have to go through that really dark stuff because that's where you're going to learn and grow the most. And it's hard when you're in that dark stuff because you're like, why does my life suck so bad? And everybody is there at some point. It's just that my journey's not necessarily going to look like your journey. And so it's easy to get stuck in that victim mentality of like, my life is always hard. And if you have that mentality, your life is always going to be hard, you know? But if you switch that mindset of like, okay, this really sucks right now. And it's okay to feel sorry for yourself sometimes. Like I have definitely been there. You just don't want to stay there. You know?
Right.
Like when I would go to my therapist and I was like, no, I'm feeling sorry for myself today, but this happened and this happened and this happened. And I'm just going to feel sorry for myself. And she's like, okay, you can do that. You got 24 hours. Tomorrow, you're not going to be there. I said, good, fine. I'm not going to be there tomorrow. But tonight, I'm just going to be here and feel sorry for myself, and that's okay. But then you learn from it. You have to take a step back and be like, okay, what am I supposed to be learning here? And that's been something of me learning and growing is I have to take a step back and look at the process and be like, okay, I had to go through this stuff, but what was I supposed to learn from it? And I think if you don't learn from it, you repeat it. And I'm like, I sure as hell don't want to repeat that again. What did I have to learn from this? And I think that's the important thing there of like understanding that, bad things happen to good people. They do. And I think that's the mindset we kind of get lost in is that understanding that just because something bad happened to you doesn't mean you're bad and it doesn't mean your life is bad and everything else. You're supposed to learn. You're supposed to learn and grow.
Right.
And, for me, one of my darkest periods of my life of going through, my husband having an affair and like pretty much losing everything led to one of the greatest blessings of my life and in getting Mad Mac and building that. So it's like those dark times aren't supposed to last forever, but you're supposed to learn and grow, and it's supposed to put you into something better. Right. That's a hard mindset to get into sometimes.
Yeah, one of the biggest mindset shifts I had to learn is that you have to have failure to have success.
100%.
You can't have success without failure. So every time you fail, just learn that you're getting experience points. You're getting closer to your goal.
Yeah.
It's like I was telling you earlier, I wish that I would have started this podcast a lot earlier instead of waiting for everything to be perfect. Even if I would have made a whole bunch of mistakes along the way, I would have been, not wasting time because time's the most valuable commodity. You can't get that back. So at least make those mistakes because you're going to be so much further ahead of people if you're just learning and failing. Like embrace the failure because you know that you're going to do better. As long as you don't repeat that same mistake, then you're getting closer to your success.
100%. Before I opened my restaurant, I was having a conversation with my brother, and he's like, I could never do what you do. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, you just take these risks, and you don't even think about it. He's like, you just take a risk. You just decide you're going to do something, and you do it. And I said, he's like, I have worked in the same industry my whole life. I've never ventured away from that because I'm afraid to start something new. I would like to own a food truck. I would like to do this kind of stuff. I'm too scared to do it. He's like, I couldn't do what you do. And I said, well, perception's a funny thing because you see the end result of what I've created. You don't see that I'm up at 3 o'clock in the morning because I can't sleep because I'm stressed out and I don't know how that's going to work. You don't see that I'm crying in the shower because I don't know how I'm going to make this all work. You can't see, that I have thought of 5 million ways that this is going to fail and only one way of how it's going to work. And so you don't see all that. You just see me putting it in an action and doing it. And I said, and I get to the point where I've already overthought it 500 different ways until I finally decide, you know what, I'm just tired of thinking about this. I'm just going to do it. And I do. And I said, but the thing is when I finally make that decision that I'm going to do it, I said, one or two things is going to happen. It's either going to be an epic success or an epic failure. But either way, I'm going to learn something. And I said, and that's why I do the things I do. Is like life is about, you have to take risks, no risk, no reward, right? For me, I want to push myself to the next level. I want to be learning and growing and trying something new. One, I get bored, but two, there's always something to learn in that for me. I said, and every time that I've done that, I've had failures. I've had failures along the way. Sometimes you try something, it doesn't work out. My first food truck didn't work out. It wasn't a good fit. So I had to rework the concept, but each time I did that, I learned something new. I learned what's working, what's not working. I learned how to make it better, how to make it more efficient. I learned even the first time I got my rear end handed to me on Mad Mac. That was great. What can I do better? So it's always about learning in that process. And you have to fail and get faceplant in order to learn sometimes. So, yeah, I 100% agree with you on that. Failure is a part of success.
That's awesome. What's your outlook now on future goals for your podcast, Mad Mac, family, all that good stuff?
I think I'm going to need a lot of caffeine to get this all done. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'm trying to learn everything, and that's why, I contacted you because I'm like, teach me about podcasting. I have an idea of where I want to go, and so it's like I just feel called to make this work. And sometimes thinking about how am I going to make this all work, with kids, with my current business, basically starting a new business. It gets overwhelming sometimes because I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I just know I'm going to do it. And so unlike you, where you are like, I have to have this planned out and it has to look perfect before I start. Me, I'm like, we're jumping off the cliff and we're going to see where we land. And that's kind of where I'm at now. It's like I have an idea and then these people keep coming into my life that help me like, okay, go here and do this and do this. And so it's kind of, I'm trusting the process, which is also pretty scary. Like, you've been there too. And it's like, you've got this goal of making this your entire living and no longer doing the 9-to-5 job, which is scary because you have a family to support, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really hard. And so I'm kind of trusting this process too. I don't know how I'm going to make it all work, but we're going to figure it out, and that's kind of who I am because I'm very stubborn. And so like when I get an idea in my head, I'm like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to figure this out. So there's going to be a lot of trial and error. There's going to be a lot of face planning. I know, but I just feel like it's all going to kind of work out and come together. So
the whole trusting the process and trusting the plan is huge.
It is especially huge. And I think also from childhood trauma, right? You kind of tend to try and control everything when you don't have the control as a child.
Yeah.
And I noticed that a lot in life, where I'd had that. And so the last couple of years of learning to let go of that control and just let be has been hard. And I feel like this is going to be one of those hard tests in doing that, of just letting go and just trusting that it's going to work out. It's scary. I'll tell you, I'm terrified. I don't know how it's going to work out, but I trust that it will.
Yeah. The good part is that, like, when I was thinking about this whole podcast thing, is it's pretty small right now for me. And that's good because then there's nobody watching me when I make all my mistakes.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it's just that whole mindset thing of flipping it from it could be bad for you or it could be the best thing for you.
Yeah.
So, but it's hard. It's definitely hard.
Yeah.
But nothing worth doing is easy, right? So.
No, and that's something I've learned in my life is like, if there isn't some growth and some failure and it's not hard at some point, then it's not really worth having, because if something's just handed to you, what do you learn from that? And what do you grow? And do you truly appreciate it? You know, like everything in life is hard. Relationships are hard. They take work. You got to work at it. Business is hard. It takes work. You know, there's so many things that take work. So it's like, I would rather do that and take the chance instead of living a life of, well, maybe. I don't want to live in the maybes. That's not the person I am. I'm going to try it. And if I fail, I fail. But I've learned something, you know, but at least I took the shot instead of living a life of like, well, I wish I would have done this, or I wish I would have done that, or like, I've already thought about it 5 million different ways, how it's not going to work. And then, of course, when it doesn't work right away, I don't know about you, but for me, when it doesn't work right away, I'm like, oh, this didn't go how I planned. This is dumb. This isn't what I was supposed to do, you know? And then you rethink it, and you're like, okay, well, this part of it didn't work. So what if we rework this part? Then will it work, you know? So we're going to trust the process, and we'll see what we get.
Absolutely. Do you have a social media for your businesses?
I do for Mad Mac. As far as the podcast goes, I'm still kind of deciding how I want to work that and stuff. But yeah, for definitely for Mad Mac, I do. And that's something, you know, also learning this podcasting and kind of social media, because I'm old. Like, I wasn't raised in the generation where we're on the phone at 2 years old and can work all the apps and stuff. Like, there's a learning curve for me, you know? And so learning, you know, how to do that also for my current business in the social media and the marketing side of things to also translate to do the podcasting side of things. So
yeah,
there's definitely a lot of learning that's going to be going on.
Yeah. Well, I'll put a link down, and everybody can follow you on the Mad Mac Facebook. And then do you have another, like, your personal Facebook, or?
Yeah, I just have my personal Facebook now, which I think I will probably transition into doing the podcasting and stuff, and I'll definitely be advertising.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that'd be sweet.
On there, and getting people, you know, to go to the podcast once I get that up and going. So
yeah.
Well,
I'm glad that you reached out, because I'm glad to have met you. You got a cool story, and anything I can do to help you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And it's been cool getting to know you and kind of seeing like where you're going with life too, and like starting the podcast. You're kind of like me, where you're like, I don't know, I'm just gonna do this. So
yeah, just jump in, figure it out.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been good to watch you like growing and doing this and stuff too, because it was literally somebody at the gym told me about your podcast. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to go check this guy out, you know? And then like hearing the stories that you have and like the other people who I also know. And it was like, oh, well, that's interesting, you know? But I'm also super grateful, like, you're teaching me and teaching me some stuff that I wouldn't have known otherwise, except for YouTube. I could have YouTubed it.
Well, it's all about that community, like you were talking about, right? Everybody can help each other out.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that I'll be reaching out to you to learn some stuff about business, because everybody helps each other out, and that's how the world turns, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's been the thing. You know, you get that community, and it's like, you need this. Like, sometimes people cross your path, and you're like, oh, I know this person. Contact them, you know? And that's been huge for me, and not just in business, but also in personal life, too, of having those connections and stuff. So I believe it all works together, and I'm a firm believer that all things happen for a reason, and all people come into your life for a reason. So sometimes they come and they're there forever, and that's like family. And then sometimes they just come to teach you some hard lessons, which is also good too.
Some people in your life for a reason. Some people are in your life for a season.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you learn that they were only there for a season when you thought they would be there for a lifetime, you know? So, yeah. But it's all about learning and growing. So
yeah, you make a plan and God laughs, right?
Yeah. I feel like he laughs a lot at my life. He's like, oh, you didn't see that one coming, did you? No, I did not. So.
Well, I look forward to following your progress too, and I'll be putting a link when yours comes up, and have everybody follow you as well.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. So we'll see how this journey plays out.
Yeah, sweet. Well, thanks for coming on, Rhi.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.